Yes, so I'm Victoria, just shortly about myself. I run European Blockchain Convention. It says there as well, yes. That's one of the biggest events in Europe. La la, yes. And I also just recently decided to invest in Philip Sandner. Well, I decided to invest in his new company builder VC, Blockchain Founders Group. So that's exciting too. But yes, we have some interesting professionals here. I told them to not agree on everything if they don't agree. Because with my own experience, when everybody agrees on a panel, it's fucking boring, right? I'm not saying they should discuss just to discuss. But if they don't agree, that they should be welcome to disagree. Okay, I'll just shortly introduce, so Philip, there you are, yes. So Philip is head of business development EMEA at Polygon Labs. And basically, he supports traditional brands to make the transition from Web2 to Web3. He has 10 years of experience in business development and sales. So you should be good at argue your course. And he's been 5 years in the crypto space. And then I asked him also to tell me a little gadget from when they were young that they really loved. And Philip's favorite gadget from when he was young is his Nintendo 64. Okay, next we have Axel. I met Axel also in Barcelona a month ago. He was part of my jury. We had a startup competition. So Axel is founder of a new fund called Vanagoon Ventures. They are 3 GPs, he's one of them as well. So basically Vanagoon Ventures is a planet-positive Web3 VC. I asked him before, what's that? But no, he'll talk a bit more about that, but they're based in Munich, and basically they are focusing on the next frontier software companies at the intersection of open financial systems and climate. It's a bit tricky, but it's cool. It happens a lot in this space, right? You ask someone, what are you doing? And they start explaining it, and you're like, I don't get it. Okay, cool. Yeah, so actually, he's been an entrepreneur for many, many years. Actually, 2 years ago, he sold a company called Agentur Matching. That was a European B2B matching platform. So he told me that kind of like a LinkedIn, but for business to business. So congratulations for that. And his favorite gadget, not electronic, but like a physical gadget from when he was young, is his bicycle, which he has been biking on for the last 32 years. So very cool. Fantastic. Then Hamid, yes, dialing in from Dubai. So he represents a little bit more like a traditional business, right? So he's managing director at the BMW Group Middle East. And he's been peering the blockchain activities in the Middle East. So that's good, because it's a very traditional industry you're in. And yeah, so he's bridging basically the old world with the new world. And yeah, has been leading a lot of and been part of a lot of interesting initiatives when it comes to blockchain in the Middle East region. So his favorite gadget from when he was young is a Super Nintendo. Good, and then we have Pierre, there you are. So Pierre is partner and global head of digital assets, Web3 and metaverse at Roland Berger. He has 20 years of experience in consulting. That's many years. And he's been in the crypto space also for many years, since 2015. That's many years. And is also board advisor of many digital asset-related startups. So you have been in the space many years. And his favorite tech gadget from when he was young was his Amiga 500. La la. And then we have Jens. I realized today that he's also Danish, right? Or at least you studied there. Good. I'm also Danish. Good. So Jens, he leads Deloitte Germany's Web3 hub, as well as Deloitte's emerging tech fund. Yes, fantastic. So his focus has been since 2016 on topics related to DLT, cryptocurrencies, and tokenization, and been working with many clients in this area. And what else? His favorite tech gadget from when he was young is his Game Boy. Yes, so big applause to our speakers. And Come on, guys, a little applause. Yay! Fantastic. Okay. So let's get started. So the first question I have for you guys is, what type of business models exist in Web3? And which ones are the most common? Who wants to start?
You're not pointing at someone?
Philip, you start.
Okay, first of all, hi everyone, pleasure to be here. I think the business models are not that different from the traditional world, right? With the exception of some that were only enabled through the technology, right? So I guess we're looking at decentralized applications. We're looking at everything enabled via NFTs. We're looking at DAOs, right? So I think these are kind of business models that are new through the technology, right? And I think we can get into a bit more of detail what kind of specific companies are behind some of these products, right? But I maybe hand over to someone else at the moment.
Axel.
Yes, happy to be here. Yeah, maybe one perspective is, of course, business models that are, like we just heard, very Web3 native, so very relying on the technology. Then it's interesting to see that more and more, let's say, normal companies start to adopt to business models and use cases that were, like in 2017, not yet heard of. For example, loyalty programs via NFTs, for example. So like Starbucks or like Douglas, for example, thinking about how we can bring loyalty and customer engagement via digital assets. And then we have also like classical Web2 business models like white labels or licensing or software as a service for services and, let's say, transaction services that use public ledger technology, but with the typical business models they already have, like, for example, transaction fees. So it's not always that Web3 has to create new business models, but can just use what users already pay for and bring it on-chain. And this makes it a lot more easier, faster, or verifiable. And so nobody has really to rethink everything, but use the technology to its advantage.
Isn't it more the interaction model that really changed instead of the business model? If you take loyalty, for example, an NFT loyalty program, as long as it's only directed at the very customer from one company, I would rather say that's not even a Web3 case, or shouldn't. But if you engage a whole ecosystem with other partners, other companies, and you can interchange them, probably merge the loyalty points or reuse them in different spaces or burn them if you don't use them on time. So the interaction model for me is more changing than the actual business models that we see.
Yeah, maybe one point to that. I agree, and maybe we don't have to think like what new kind of business models bring the Web3, but what kind of use cases are getting Web3'd. And I think this is what you mentioned, that we don't have to invent everything new, rely on it and use the technology to create, for example, a way more verifiable loyalty program than before. And there we are. So.
But do we need a more how do you say, verifiable loyalty program? Is that, I mean, if I'm interacting with, I don't know, Whirling, one of the Spanish, low cost or whatever it is, flight companies, do I really need to? I mean, I'm already paying them. I trust them. I use the flights.
Okay, so now we're at the point where we can disagree, right? You mentioned at the beginning. So I'm not sure whether I got your point 100% correct, but I think Web3 is important to the component here. And I mean, we are working with Starbucks, right, and others in that regard. So let's take
one. Does Starbucks need blockchain for that?
Sorry?
Do they need blockchain for that?
I want to give one specific example that I think only works because of blockchain, right? So let's look at Porsche, for example, right? They had their NFT drop. And shortly after, a hotel chain said, okay, if you're a holder of that NFT, you get 10% discount at our hotels. They never spoke to Porsche about this, right? They didn't need to ask because it's all in the public ledger, right? They can just interact with it. And just think of the big programs that are out there right now, right? Let's take, I don't know, Miles and More from the Lufthansa or whatever, right? Imagine how much work it would be for two big corporates to collaborate and get to that point. And now this hotel chain did it in a couple of days and never spoke to them. So I think it is different because, and that's why I started with it, the technology is different, and that's why also the business model is different.
But then you're saying like you're kind of like creating an identity around some assets, right? Because basically, you know, so you were holding this NFT, you said, and then you could get a 10% discount. So it's kind of like you're creating an identity, and then those people, those identities behind those NFTs could then get 10%. I mean, it's more like on a philosophical level that you have like then an identity behind, and you want to get to that kind of person.
Yeah, I think, I mean, the question then is, I'm not sure whether I get the question 100%, but I think, yes, we're going in the direction where you have your digital identity, but what that means exactly, we're all trying to figure out. I think there's no answer.
Hamid,
So maybe I can add. Yes, exactly. I was just about to add. I think I see it more as an amplifier for existing businesses. So it amplifies blockchain, and Web3 allows to amplify existing businesses. And based on the example, what I think Philip you just mentioned, it's the advantage of being peer-to-peer allows companies to, I don't want to say step out of maintaining and managing those kind of loyalty programs, but go on to a peer-to-peer, let's say, mode, and it allows much more benefit to add on to those systems for customers. And at the end, in the let's say traditional industry, this is what it counts for. It's just to have more benefits.
Sorry, Hamid, I think your connection or your headset or something or speakers are not the best. Maybe for the next question, we need to fix that, if possible. Yeah? So, but yeah, just if you want to repeat the last sentence, because the connection was not too good.
I just said that, you know, at the end, if it's a peer-to-peer discussion in terms of the loyalty programs, that increases the benefits for customers. And I think that's the ultimate goal for traditional companies, to add benefit for their customers.
I'd like to add something to this. I think I don't want to repeat what all the others said, but for sure there's this massive potential of bringing Web2 use cases into Web3. But I think we also have in particular two categories where Web3 is now empowering new use cases that haven't been possible before. One is for sure on the entire auditability of commodity trading. And that can be in particular environmental commodities. We spoke about Senken the other day. I think that's a perfect case. Trading of CO2 certificates has lots of issues that are kind of taken away by using blockchain for that. And then we're going to see I think a revolution on the entire data sharing model. That's for me like the main thing that's going to happen. Because if we think about the entire smart city movement that used to be very on vogue over the past 5, 6, 7 years, then all of this stopped at one point in time because there was only so much a central entity or governments could do to empower a smart city. Now, for the first time in history, we have a technology that allows for data privacy, data preserving wallets with microtransactions that weren't feasible before. So that's an entire new class of business models.
Thank you. Okay, good answers. Okay, next question I have for you guys. So these companies, Web2, Web3 companies, are they actually making money right now, being in the Web3 space? Or is it too early? And if they are making money, what kind of monetization models are they using? Show me the money. Yes.
I mean, it's tough because the question is so broad. We look at, in this question, we put together DAOs or bridging models in the DeFi space now with the
How does DAOs make money?
I mean, they could hold money. It depends on how you set up the DAO, and it could fund itself and buy itself new features by paying for a developer. But what I meant is we now compare what BMW, for example, is doing with a DeFi model. So saying how do they make money and do they do it in the same way? It's pretty hard to really bring that together because they do make money. I mean that's for sure. And they do make sense. Otherwise, we wouldn't see so much traction in the market, also in the banking space, but also in other spaces. Nevertheless, I think we should cut it down into smaller chunks and not only talk about Web3 in the total, but to the extent of what is in Web3. Are we now talking about DeFi and digital assets, or are we talking about digital infrastructure and things like IPFS? So I think it's really to cut down a little.
I would say there are at least over 110 Web3 companies that are already as unicorn status. So those get at least, you don't get a unicorn status when you don't make any money. And we know those companies like SoRare, Binance, Yuga Labs, so they all have their business models and they're doing a lot. We also know, of course, companies that still try to find Web3 business models. What I say, they don't have to. We know also in Germany companies that make a lot of money, like, I don't know, Tangerine, for example, as a custodian. This is a classical Web3 custody business, and it's very easy. You have certain assets under management, you get paid for it, and we know this for, I don't know, 100 years. It's a typical banking business model. So again, the question is not, do they make money, but what will be kind of, do we have the need to create only business models that rely only on kind of on-chain use cases? We like to see, and this is more and more emerging, use cases that are kind of baked into normal internet transaction, for example. So when you have a company, a project that does securitization on-chain, and they get paid for the transaction of the security. Very basic, but on the other hand, very, very public ledger-like, because you have a transaction from A to B, but you don't need D, E, F, and Z like intermediaries. And all the money that normally would go to the D, E, and F is now spared between A and B, and this is the business model. So there will come a lot of these very standardized business models, but relying on public ledgers, for example.
But then, Axel, just some of the first, how do I say, use cases successful you mentioned was some exchanges and some marketplaces. But that's actually not very innovative, right? That's just like a Web2 way of doing business, but related to the technology, right?
Yeah, like the example with one of the unicorns, of course, we all know SoRare. And of course, they get also transaction fees for the NFTs people trade. Very easy and very simple, but only possible because of the verifiable transactions being traded on chain. So here is kind of the technology, the enabler for the transaction fee.
Just want to add one thing. At an earlier side event, we spoke about adoption, right? And I think we are seeing a classical S-curve in adoption, meaning right now we have roughly 0.2% in the world of global assets, right? So 1 trillion is crypto, 500 trillion roughly is the global asset class, right? So when can businesses make money? Not in the early stage, right? But that was the same for the internet age, right? So, and I mean, well, Amazon was loss-making for more than a decade, and sometimes they still are, right? Because they reinvest. Why should it be different, right? It shouldn't. Right? Some businesses are VC funded, so they can be loss-making in the beginning, right? Some are bootstrapping, it's just the same. So I think it doesn't really matter, it's just another technology.
Pierre, Hamid?
I mean, I completely agree to the points, so that's why my answer is not too exciting on this.
We shouldn't. Yeah.
I know, but I mean, I'm not going to make something up now for the sake of disagreeing. So. But I think maybe the only thing to add is I think there are different buckets of profitability. If I look at anything that's around the future of finance, then for sure this has a shorter time frame to profitability, and we already see some business models being very profitable.
Is that because more money goes there from investors, or I mean, like
it's the easy to understand use case, right? And the other thing is, I mean, whether we like it or not, this space is also driven very much by speculators still, right? So you go where the money might be coming out first. So all the financial use cases will definitely be more on the shorter term. All the use cases that are about, more fancy stuff, whether it's data marketplaces, supply chain, that was probably going to be some 5 years out until they really start making significant returns. But I think what you see overall in the landscape is people have really understood that, I mean, there's no going back. This is going to happen, hence the investments are flowing. I mean, 94 billion of VC investments since 2016, right? I mean, that's massive, right?
Yeah?
So I hope my audio is now much better.
Let's give it a try.
All right. So actually, as BMW, we're a traditional company for over 100 years. And in order to survive so long, you have to make money every year. And valuation might be different to profitability. So hence you see a lot of companies right now on the face that are highly valued, but maybe less profitable. But at the end, proof is in the pudding if really those companies can survive really long term. Right now, there's, as mentioned before, a lot of speculations and high risk companies. But if I would be now as a company like BMW with my brand to partner with any chain or any, let's say, Web3 company, which is not profitable, gives me a little bit of, let's say, nervousness, because I don't know if those projects or this company will survive many years to come. And speaking of adoption, this is a crucial place for the industry, is to show the longevity of its business. And just taking transaction fees, you will see in other cases might not end up very well if the inherited business is not per se successful.
Thank you. Okay, so let's continue. Yeah, you've all heard that in Web 2, data is the new oil, or was the new oil. So what about in Web 3? What's the new oil in Web 3?
Assets in any form.
Data.
Assets, data?
I would even say the new oil is the transaction itself. So we have ownership, but the one who owns the transaction from one owner to another, I think there's the oil digging right now.
The ownership.
Ownership itself is, of course, one thing we have in Web3, but if you want to trade one asset to another, you have a transaction. And those that right now offer a very secure and very stable way to do the transaction on chain, they are making a lot of money.
Yeah. Philip?
I think it will be both data and assets, right? But I agree it's more about who owns it, right? Because I think dealing with a lot of consumer brands, right? Your community, your consumer base, usually they sit in silos and you don't own them, despite the fact that you are, let's say, the car manufacturer, right? If you have followers on social media, right, you don't own them, right? And that can be disrupted now, right? So I think a lot of brands look into having a direct connection to consumer or fan base again, right? So that will be very different.
Exactly. I mean, this is access to your customers, direct access to your customers. I think that's the new oil for us, because then you know who the customer is, what kind of preference he or she has, and then can basically upsell or cross-sell your product.
Fantastic. So direct access to your customers, the transaction, data, and...
Yeah, let me give you one more thing on the data part, why I think it's really important. And that has something to do with the rise of AI, right? I mean, we've all seen now that the promise of AI all of a sudden was very tangible, right? If we just project this into the future for a bit, AI will thrive on data, on your data. If there's no solution out there that allows assets, companies, individuals to have their own data wallet, to make data verifiable, and for you to participate in the transactions with AI, this is not going to end well. That's why I also think crypto is kind of the key to the lock of AI.
And that's also what I meant with saying a different interaction model and the assets and the transaction. In the end, in Web 2, if you were an influencer, you build an audience. They call it community, but it isn't, because it's one direction. And in Web3, it's about a community, because you need both ways. You need the customer to be engaged, to engage with you. And the loyalty example is also a good one. There is a community that is building upon something else, upon the Porsche token, offering another service. So it's different interaction models that we see. And this is also why we see those easy financial services use cases. They aren't so easy, but because they don't rely on this large, broad community picture. And this is also why we have seen interesting examples, actually, that build on really changing a whole industry, like in trade finance or insurance spaces, where there were early projects that failed now. But it's not because they were awful. It's also because they were too early and too far away from return on investment.
Yeah, if I may, I just want to piggyback and stress one point, what Pierre said, right? I think most of the people here in the room are probably on Twitter and using it every day, right? So at least for me, in the last couple of weeks, whenever I was on, every time I saw something that was interesting to me, I was like, is that real or is that now AI generated? Because everyone is playing with DALL-E or ChatGPT or whatever, right? So, and maybe at the moment it's like fun topics, right? But let's think about the next big election, right? And we don't know, is that really coming from that person, right? And if you don't have it verified by a private key, we won't know. So I think it's super, super important. So I agree with your point.
Okay, so we don't have that much time left, but I think this question is also important because, well, we all talk about decentralizing, you know, our economy, the whole world, but then we look into the space, right? And we do see so many business models based on intermediaries, right? So we talk about decentralizing the economy. So why is that? I mean, does that make sense? Is it linked together?
I would not. We decentralize, but we never said that we won't use different parties. We simply don't rely on central points. We have a different way of setting it up, and often those intermediaries, at least in a sensible way, add trust to information. Again, to your point, verified information. May it be the onboarding, or may it be that this picture of the Pope is real.
Pierre?
Well, I think we're not going to end up in a completely decentralized world, but I hope, and this is what I hope we end up in a decentralized world where it really brings benefits for the society, yeah, and where it cuts down unnecessary middleman cost. And that can be in parts, obviously, in some financial services that we have. Also, it will not only cut down costs, it will be more inclusive. That's also my hope for the technology. But we will also...
How does it get more inclusive?
I mean, if you look at the people that are unbanked today, according to the World Bank, we're still talking about 1.6 billion people that don't have access to financial services.
But they don't have access to internet many times.
Well, that's going to be fixed relatively soon, right? And if you look at Africa and mobile payment adoption, then it's very clear, right? And this is in particular the place where we have a lot of unbanked people. So I think this tech is going to be very, very inclusive. It will give access to wealth management for nearly everyone on the planet. Whether you have $50 or $100,000, doesn't matter, you can just connect. But what I also going to think is going to happen is we're going to disrupt a lot of the Web2 champions. You know, like 5 years ago, everyone wanted to be the Uber of, I want to be the Uber of energy, Uber of something. I think Uber is going to be Uberized with the Web3 model.
Axel?
Maybe just to add one thing. I think the decentralization is kind of maybe the paradigm of the technology, but it doesn't have to be the paradigm of use cases. So of course, we need kind of on-ramp services or something. There will be someone centralized doing, for example, on-ramp. But the use case itself has to, like you said, serve users. And if the service is like making a transaction, again, coming to the transaction, kind of more cheaper, more verifiable, more kind of giving people the chance to do transaction in the beginning, then I'm totally fine. When some part of the service, some part of the value chain or the customer journey is not decentralized, then so what? Okay, let's go. Because from a VC perspective, we have a business model. And then it's fine.
Yeah, very short one. I think in the end, the market will decide, right? If there's enough demand for a decentralized model of anything, it will be built, right? And one specific example I can think of is, I don't know whether the audience knows Nostr, right? But Nostr is a decentralized social media. So people that were banned from existing platforms, they decided we need something else. And we're not getting into politics here, whether that's right or wrong, but free speech, right? So there is a need for it, there's demand, so it will be built. And I think that's true for everything else as well.
Hamid?
Unfortunately, I have to agree with everyone who has said so far. But I mean, I think it's scary to live in a centralized world, and it's also scary to live in a completely decentralized world. And I think that the truth is somewhere in between, depending on the use case, depending on the business model, depending on the activities. So I think we have to live in a hybrid world going forward, but we will have both going forward.
Very nice. Well, I just have one last question, just maybe one can answer. So just like, are we then ready for this, Web3 space and ready to own things, in the Web3 space? I don't know, I mean, we still mess around with our private keys and wallets and, are we ready?
No. No, we're not ready, but I think we're going to get there. But it's going to be two deciding factors. One is the industry providing a better user experience. And if you look at some of the projects, for instance, what the guys from Radix have been launching recently with their wallet, this all goes into a Web 2 feeling of a Web 3 application. So we need that first. Second, though, is I'm not sure how much of us really want to take the responsibility of self-custody, right? And it's going to be an interesting question that's going to be played out. Maybe next year we have a better answer to that.
I can distisagree.
Yeah, I'm really
Just
I'm
one-
really sorry, Axel, because we're already a couple of minutes over time, and we have really so much still to discuss about.
Thank you so much. Thank
I'm
you,
sorry.
guys. Big applause.
Everyone, thank you very much.
And we can continue outside.